Hello, my name is Kayla Bundy and welcome back to the Finding Hope podcast. I am so happy you're here and I hope you've been having the best week ever and that after listening to this, it gets 10 times better. Also, Pixie Rose is joining us today. If you guys have not met her yet, she is the absolute love of my life, absolute gem. She's been super cuddly lately, so she's gonna join in for the podcast because there's no way I could put her on the ground or anywhere else besides me and she wouldn't freak out today. Now, I'm sure everyone listening is at very different comfort zones when it comes to today's topic and how physically affectionate you are okay with. So today we're really going to dive deep. I'm going to try to do my best to be so honest and open in ways that provide hope above anything else. But healing, encouragement, clarity, and a voice for you to feel heard is definitely my goal for this podcast. And yeah, we're really getting into it today. So I hope you're ready. I hope you're on your little hot girl walk. I hope you're just ready to dive right in with me because this one's definitely the most vulnerable one we have done yet. And bear with me because you guys are in my safe space here and I'm excited to be able to talk about these things in such an honest and real way in hopes that it's going to help you be in a better place after it. So, sexual boundaries. I want to start off by saying that physical boundaries are fluid and changing. And in all things, we have a capacity. And as I was doing research for this episode, I was listening to a few other people talk on this and just do some research on my own. And something that I found so incredibly helpful was knowing that we all have a capacity in every single thing in life. And that capacity can change by the day, by the hour. And essentially, in general, whether it's work, exercise, socializing, we all know what our limits are of how much our bodies can take, where we feel good and productive versus tired or overworked or strained or burnt out and like you need alone time. And so this capacity can change each day or throughout the day. And the same is true for our physical or sexual capacity. And this was huge, you guys. This was so helpful for me to understand because I knew, like, when I've been in relationships that what I'm okay with one day is totally different based on the next day. And I knew that, like, I knew there were certain things physically that I'd want to do versus times that I was like, don't come near me, don't touch me. And so knowing that actually we do have a capacity that is different every day and knowing that it's okay and that's fluid and changing just gave me so much peace, feeling like, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, it's okay if where I'm at one day is different than the next. And not even just sexually or like in an intimate way, but on a friend level as well. Like, there are sometimes my physical capacity has been at a high and I can handle a lot more because let's say I've had a bad day or I'm emotional, I'm starting my period, etc. And during those times, sometimes I want way more physical affection. I want way more hugs from my friends. I want them to hold my hand. I want them to brush my hair. I want them to do something where I feel very cared for and loved in a physical way. Versus there's other times where I'm really stressed out, I'm drained, I'm overworked, and I'm irritated. And the last thing I want is for anybody to come up and touch me or put their hand on my shoulder, anything like that. I'm just like, get away. And so it can definitely change through friendships, through romantic relationships, through family, through everything. and what we've gone through during that day. Whether it's been a really stressful day, whether it's been a really good day, whether we have a lot on our plate, whether something came out of the blue that now we have to process. And that can change what we are physically comfortable with in that moment or for the rest of that day. So knowing and having peace that my physical boundaries are fluid and changing gave me a lot of clarity, and knowing it's okay if what I'm comfortable with is changing with the ebb and flow. And our culture celebrates pushing yourself past your capacity so much in everything. If it's career, you're praised for working more hours than what you were supposed to. If it's fitness, you're praised for, pushing your body to the absolute extreme, never giving it rest, just going to the gym another day, etc. So making sure of your limits and respecting your limits is so powerful. And that's where there's going to be so much more success in every aspect of your life when you can understand those limits and have the respect for them for yourself and know how to navigate each day within those boundaries that you've created for yourself. And not in a way that's like, oh, I can't push my body or I can't push this or that. I definitely would encourage you to have a strong willpower and be able to push your body physically when it comes to exercise, or be able to push yourself in your career, be able to push those limits to a healthy point, knowing what your capacity actually is and not trying to burn yourself out from it. And especially when it comes to physical things, know your capacity, because if you will try to push yourself past your capacity, I can almost promise you are not going to feel good, and it's not going to be leaving a pleasant memory in your head, and that's going to be really hard to recover from. And for me too, I feel like when I've tried to push myself past my limit and my capacity, I feel way more out of control of my body, and I'm not confident in the choices I've made, and I don't feel good about the choices I've made, and I feel like I didn't have the say over my body. Even though I did, I just was trying to push past what I actually knew I could handle. So now this brings me to how to decide what your physical boundaries are. Little story time, but when I was growing up, I was very naive in my thinking. And I don't know if I've said this before on the podcast, but I was homeschooled my whole life. I went to college and things like that, but I was homeschooled up until graduating high school. And I just was raised Christian, and sex was so not talked about. Nothing physical was talked about. My parents wanted me to wait for my first kiss until the day I was getting married. We just didn't talk about anything physical. And so I was so naive when it came to sexual things that can happen. And I had absolutely no idea that there was so much more that can happen in between kissing and then having sex. In my head, I just thought, oh, you can kiss, and then doing more than kissing is having sex. I had no clue about all the in-betweens and everything that can go on in the in-betweens. So little clueless me was completely thrown off guard when I was in an intimate moment that went farther than kissing. And I'll say my boundaries, what they are, so that way you have some understanding as to where I am in my life with what I'm okay with, and just giving some context for where the podcast is going and you understand me better. But I, at that point, had already known that my boundary was not having sex until marriage. And that is still my boundary. But up until that point, I had no idea that I might not be comfortable with doing other things as well. And I learned that a lot of times you don't even know what your boundaries are until something's already happened. And it might take some time to process and understand how you feel about it. And sometimes you might learn after the fact where you want your boundary to be. And for me, it's not like I think sex is bad in any way or that I'm scared of it. It's actually the complete opposite. I think it is one of the most beautiful and special ways to be vulnerable with somebody and experience an incredibly deep love. Like, I believe there's just so much value in sex and so much good for your relationship and a ground for you to stand on. And it holds so much importance for me that I know so deeply how much I want to save that for the person I am marrying. And for me, I not only value my body a lot, but I also want to value my partner's. I know so clearly that for myself, I only ever want to experience that intimacy with one person for the rest of my life. And honestly, waiting brings me so much joy. Like, I know it sounds dumb, you guys, but knowing that I have that to look forward to, and when it happens, I won't have to worry about the heartbreak or insecurity or lack of emotional intimacy on the other side of that. Because if I'm already so connected and in love fully to the point where I am going to marry that person just on an emotional level that isn't rooted in sexual desires, I find that to be such a powerful and incredible thing. And to be able to say yes, to vow the rest of your lives, to spend it together without physical desires being what holds you together at that point in your relationship, I think it's just so unique and so precious. And I mean, of course, you know, I'm not there in my life yet. I'm not married, and there can be issues in marriage for sure. But for me, I genuinely love knowing that I'm waiting and knowing that I can be so deeply connected to somebody without experiencing that. And I do find sex to be incredible, and I'm thrilled for the day that, you know, that door's opened in my life. But I feel very, very powerful having control over my body and being able to say no, and knowing that no is never going to change until I'm with my forever person. So when it comes to deciding what your boundaries are, I would highly suggest thinking about what certain things may lead to and sort of visualize what you would ideally like to do in those moments. And because my boundary is not having sex, I want to make sure that the physical choices I make in relationships help me to maintain that boundary and make it easier to not feel tempted to cross my limit based on an emotional or heated moment that I'm experiencing. And what I mean is, we all know what it's like when things get a little steamy and you're in love or you're so physically attracted to a person and things start escalating. And if you can visualize, okay, where could this go? It can be so helpful in deciding what you're going to do in those moments if that does happen. And I know in the moments where like I've just been so thrown off and did not see something coming, was not expecting it to get that heated, that's when it's like it's a lot harder for me to be like, do I want this? Am I okay with this? Am I crossing a boundary right now? Am I not crossing a boundary right now? Is this something I'll regret later? Is this something I'm gonna enjoy? Like, I feel like there's a million thoughts in my head. And one, it takes away from me actually enjoying what's going on. And then two, I usually am not thrilled with how things might end after that, whether I did stop it, whether I didn't. I usually just don't love the outcome either way. And so if I can visualize like, okay, but having time to mentally prepare yourself, I'll say that, for what could happen. And like, because I know my boundary is not having sex, it's like, okay, if things are getting really heated and if I'm getting really tempted, then I want to make sure that the choices I'm making along the way are making it very easy for me to have that boundary not be crossed. And if I'm making choices constantly that are really pushing that limit and really tempting me to want to do more, or really like playing with that line, I know that logically down the road, that's probably going to make things so much harder for me to say no to something I've made a previous decision about saying no to. So I want to encourage you to just visualize this in a way that is going to help you make your boundaries so much easier to maintain and keep in place in the areas that you want them to be. And whether that's having sex, whether that's not, whether that's kissing, whether it's not, like, it can be so many different things. I'm just giving you my example, but there's so much that can happen if you are having sex. And if you're not, or where you're at physically and what you're okay with, and taking that time to get to know yourself and where you want to stand, where your capacity is not being pushed. So that is why I say visualize what you would like to be the ideal outcome in romantic moments, so that you can mentally prepare yourself to either say no, or know when to stop, or know how to not feel tempted to do more, or be able to enjoy those moments. Next, when it comes to how to set boundaries for yourself, you can't be doing something without a deep why. Your heart has to be connected to your reasoning. What is going to most likely hold you accountable isn't going to be a checklist of what's right or wrong. It's going to be something that actually grounds you. And if what you're rooted in is conviction or emotion, it is not sustainable. And if I were to have my boundary rooted in feeling guilty, or feeling judged, or feeling convicted, it honestly probably wouldn't stick, and it wouldn't have stuck as long as it has. You have to be connected to your why. I cannot stress this enough. In anything in life, the reason you do things is going to be why you actually are able to get that done. And in work, in relationships, in life, in school, in anything, if the reason you're doing something you are very strong in and you know so clearly, that reasoning doesn't cloud your judgment when things get thrown your way that are difficult, that are hard, that are stressful, that are challenging. Your reasoning is always what can push you through. And the same thing transfers over when it comes to your physical boundaries and your limits. Your why is what you really need to be connected to, and knowing your why is going to be so transformative into setting those boundaries and actually upholding those boundaries. And I just don't think that you want it to be because of a shaming motive, the judgment, or that you're getting crapped on by other people and you're worried about that. You genuinely just need to know it for yourself. And boundaries should be rooted in power, not fear. Your reasonings should be drawing from a place of power and not of shame. Like, your no is such a powerful thing. And I was actually talking to a friend about this the other day, and there is so much power in life in general when you have the option to do something that you don't necessarily want to do and you're able to say no to it. If you don't have the option to say no, and then it doesn't feel as powerful. Versus when you have the option and you are able to reinforce the decisions you've already made in your head and say no to something, that is such a confidence ground to stand on. And I want to say, like, personally, I am so blessed to have such a solid why where I haven't felt embarrassed or shameful or less valued because I'm saving myself. I genuinely feel way more confident in who I am, and I feel like I have even more to offer because I know myself so well, and I have such a ground for me to stand on that it brings me even more confidence in relationships, and especially with who you're with. That's a big one. Thankfully, I haven't really ever been with somebody that makes me feel bad about waiting. They're always more than respectful, but it also helps me choose like the people that I would even consider being with when I'm able to communicate that boundary and based on their response, and I'm able to communicate it in a way where I am having power in my no, and I'm not timid, I'm not shy, I'm not like, I'm so sorry, I can't do that, I don't feel comfortable with that, versus being like, this is what I'm okay with, this is what I'm not okay with, and I want you to know that I won't go farther than this. There's just such a difference in the confidence that you have behind the way you say it. And another thing to think about when trying to be able to uphold these boundaries is, what do you know about yourself that will help you walk out your boundaries? Like, what things or situations may cloud your judgment personally for yourself? And taking the time to think about that, like, you know, if I have alcohol, is that going to cloud my judgment? If I'm alone with them at night or I'm sleeping over in their bed, is that going to cloud my judgment? And these are just examples, and I'm not saying these are my examples, these are just examples. But knowing yourself and taking the time to think about, okay, like, is being one-on-one with them, is that where like things get steamy? Like, knowing what has happened in your life and what things are going to make your judgment a little less clear is great to figure out for yourself, and so helpful in living out your boundary. And before I move on, I really do just want to say, please don't ever let yourself have your boundaries rooted in fear and be scared of saying no to certain things because of the reaction you might get on the other end. And I know it can be really scary saying no to things because you don't want that rejection. You don't want to feel bad or disappointing them. And I've definitely been there where guys have. I mean, I know I said they've been really respectful, but even in their respect, there's definitely been moments where I feel so bad for not doing more physically. And I just want to stress that, like, it's so important that you aren't feeling guilty or bad or afraid of saying no because of the way the other person's gonna respond or make you feel. So how to keep the boundaries you've decided on? I would say be honest early on with the person that you're setting these boundaries with, and feel empowered in your decision, like I said. Don't be sugarcoating it. Just be honest and confident in your boundary and why. Definitely explain your why. And it could be as simple as, I don't kiss on the first date, I don't sleep over in my relationships, etc. You can decide your own boundaries for yourself. But we are so worried about that person liking us so early on that we might not stick to our boundaries from the start or communicate them. And if somebody that you're considering dating or it's relatively new, that is the best time to communicate those boundaries, because once you start building that connection and those things haven't been talked about, most likely are not going to be on the same page with that, and one of you is going to be wanting more or wanting less. And so if you can just communicate that from the start, even though it's a little uncomfortable, it's just so much better in the long run, and it saves you so much time and heartbreak. I heard this example and I love this example, so I'm going to use the same one. I don't remember what person said it, but they said if you are on page 2, let's say you're in a book, okay? And what your physical boundaries are page 2. And their physical boundaries are page 3. They're a little bit farther ahead of you. You most likely are going to end up on page 3. It is very rare that who you're with, if they're okay doing more than you are, that you're going to end up doing what you're okay with. You're most likely going to eventually, as time goes on, do more than what you're okay with and be on the same page with them. And that's not bad, that's not wrong. I'm just saying that if you can know beforehand what page you both are on and know that, okay, logically, we're most likely going to end up on the same page here. And is that going to be your page or my page? And are these things going to line up? Is very, very, very important to know. And I've dated guys where they were on page 7 and I was on page 1. And it wasn't always great. I can guarantee that. It did not always feel great. And there's also been times, though, where it's been the same thing and the guy has been more than respectful, and I've been able to communicate my why so clearly that they end up wanting to be on that page for themselves, and not just because I'm only comfortable on that page, but they genuinely want that for themselves as well. And they explore, this whole topic basically on their own. And that's a wonderful thing when we can both meet each other on that page. My foot is falling asleep because Pixie Rose is on it. Also, quick little, she's like a little egg. This is honestly my favorite thing, when I can hold her like this and she's in this little position. Mommy loves you so much, sweetie. Yes, she does. Okay, sorry, getting back to it. I just had to readjust because I literally cannot feel my entire leg. So moving on, your environment is everything. And just like anything in life, if you want to be good at something, you're most likely going to cultivate your environment to push you in that field. And whether that's becoming a doctor, whether that's being an actor, whether it's dance, whether it's literally anything, as you're growing up, okay, if you want to play sports in college, guess what? You're probably going to join a team in high school, and you're going to get around people that are ahead of you in that field and that you can learn from, and be around peers that are going to push you in that field. So that way you can get into the team that you want, you can get to the college you want. And same with work. Your environment is just so crucial in every aspect of your life. And the same is true sexually. You want to feel encouraged, safe, heard, confident, and not embarrassed. So it's so crucial to be around friends and people that have very similar boundaries as you, and not only respect yours, but are able to cheer you on and are a safe place to discuss things with. And in the moments that I feel like I haven't been as proud of where I've stood with my boundaries, a lot of it has been my environment. And I wasn't getting the advice that I needed for me, or I didn't feel encouraged. I may have felt like, okay, yeah, they understand I'm not going to do this. Like, my friends know this isn't me. But they're not going to give me the advice or the encouragement when I am struggling with something that I know is going to make me feel better about the choices I'm making. In high school, before I had really gotten to know myself and develop who I am as a person, being confident in my yes, being confident in my no, just knowing what I'm okay with, and knowing maybe these things before sex I'm also not okay with. Maybe I am okay with this, all of that. I was like I said, just very naive. And so I remember when something happened that I had no idea was a thing, and I didn't have anybody to really process with. And I went to my best friend at the time, and I didn't even tell her. Because and this is a big thing too, I didn't even tell her because I didn't talk to anybody in high school about what was going on physically, because I just didn't feel like I had any safe person. And in no way was I going to talk to my parents or my siblings or my friends, because I felt really embarrassed or shameful or confused. And I didn't want to bring something up that I didn't really know about. And so also having somebody that you can talk to is so important. And now I'm so thankful for the people I have in my life, because I know these topics are never fun and they're never comfy. And it's always awkward to try to bring these things up. And I'm just so blessed that the people I've had now or along the way have really been such a safe, understanding, encouraging space for me. It has completely transformed the way I'm able to navigate this topic in my relationships. So back to when something had happened and my best friend came to me, because I didn't tell her, but he had told her, and she came to me and she didn't really talk about it, but she goes, "Hey, I know what happened and I'm so proud of you." And she was proud of me because I let that happen. And I remember that affected me, that comment affected me for years, because I was young. I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't know myself. I didn't really understand that anything could happen like that. And having the person I was closest to say she was proud of me for doing something that was past my limit in a way, that really messed with me. And it confused me a lot as to knowing, oh, well, maybe I am comfortable with this, because maybe this is something I should be doing. Even though it's not sex, yeah, maybe that's fine. Or maybe I don't have this weird, uncomfortable feeling, even though I did. It really messed with me in ignoring the things that I was actually feeling about it at that time. And had I had somebody to talk to that I said what happened or whatever, they knew, and they said "Hey, I know you probably weren't expecting that. Are you okay? How do you feel about that? Was that out of your comfort zone? Where do you stand on that? Was that, pushing yourself to the goal of being able to save yourself? Or did that make things kind of shake your world? And do you need to process this?" That response would have been so helpful for me at that time, and not having a forced opinion on whether it was good or bad. So having people that aren't going to force their opinion, but just be there to listen and process things through with you, is so important. And I encourage you so much to take that step and break that uncomfortable topic or barrier. And whether that's you sending them this podcast and that's your little hey, so maybe we should talk about what's going on with me. This can be your little intro. Or maybe you just come to them and you're so, I've kind of been doing this and I really just want to be able to talk to somebody about it. Not hiding that is huge. And I know we're all in different places, like I said, with what we're physically comfortable with or what's normal to talk about. And for me, talking about anything sexual or physical was just so not normal. And it took so much of my pride to just leave me to be able to actually bring something like this up to somebody and seek out advice in it. And be able to like admit like, hey, I don't know everything. I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know how I feel about this. And that took so much effort from me and my side to be able to have those conversations with people. But after having them, I am thrilled that I opened up that door, or that other people have tried to open that door with me, because I, one, have grown my friendship with those people so much more, and it's on such a deep level. But then I also have accountability, and I also have somebody else who knows me and knows my heart, able to encourage me in the choices I'm trying to make. And I know how important that is, because when you're in a relationship, it can get so confusing, because you both obviously love one another, you care about each other, and it's easy to kind of play around with the boundaries, and it's hard to stay so grounded in who you are, or it's hard to stay so grounded in the physical things that you've set for yourself and the barriers you've set, when you don't have anybody that's not in the relationship knowing or able to help you stand firm in what those are and remind you like, hey, this is why you're doing this. Or like, hey, like you weren't going to do this because, you know, you've had a lot of traumatic experiences and you don't know this guy that well. And, you know, who knows if he's loyal? Who knows if he's this? Like having somebody to just be like, hey, let's talk about this. Let's like, I want to encourage you in the things that you have set for yourself. And I want to be able to push you to fulfill those desires and those boundaries and not judge you if they're broken, is tremendous. So put guardrails in place where you know you're going to feel like you're lacking. And name your limit, explain your limit, be honest. It is so essential, like I said, and doing your part in helping your partner understand where you're coming from and why you don't want to do more. Like genuinely just giving them insight into your heart and your reasoning can provide so much trust between the two of you, both knowing where the other person's coming from. And that's something I have not always been great at. I definitely have lacked a lot in previous relationships or things with guys where I didn't clearly communicate why I didn't want to do certain things or why I wasn't okay or comfortable. And when I haven't clearly communicated, it honestly, like I know it leaves them really frustrated. And I know if I were on the other end of that and they weren't okay with doing certain things that I was okay with doing and they didn't tell me why, I would feel really frustrated and I would feel like it was my fault or it was something I was doing wrong. And just the not understanding would cause me, I know, so much frustration. So being honest with your partner about why is huge. For one, for them to respect you, for you to uphold your boundaries, but also a way to love them and cue them into what's going on in your head so they can feel like, oh, okay, this isn't my problem. This isn't my thing. Nothing is because of me. This is what they've decided on their own. And now I can go about how I'm going to respect that and respond to this, versus just them not having any clue what's going on. And little example, but even like there's been times where I just like don't want to kiss somebody that I'm with and I just pretend that like I haven't noticed we haven't kissed in 2 months, where I know it's just in my head I'm like, ugh, I know if I kiss you it's probably going to lead to more, so I'm just not going to kiss you and hope that you don't notice. Versus when I communicate, hey, I feel like things are getting a little too like steamy and I'm really tempted right now. And I know like lately I've been getting really tempted. So maybe we just, maybe we shouldn't make out as much. That's a way better way of going about that situation than me just like, yeah, we're going to hope he doesn't notice that I'm not kissing him for the next like 2 months. So things like that are kind of what I'm talking about. If you're also on the other end, you're on the receiving end where your boundaries are maybe a little less set in stone or a little more open than your partner, just ask yourself, like, how can I learn to listen better and realize that no's are not a rejection. This is a huge one. And realize that for yourself as well. Whenever I have said no to something, it is never me rejecting them or not wanting that. Our bodies were definitely created for that. So it's not like I don't have these physical desires, or it's not that I don't want it. It's just I know my limit and what I'm going to be okay with. And so if you can realize that no does not equal rejection, you'll just feel a lot better about yourself and in your relationship, knowing that, hey, this person's not saying no to me because they don't want this or because they don't want to ever have that with me. It's just they've set this boundary and I'm not the one changing that boundary. That boundary is not going to change no matter what, and that's them. That's so much better. Just questions to ask yourself are like, can I trust you to still love me and respect me if I say no? Or am I a safe person to accept their no? I value that they feel safe saying no to me. That's a big one. And I want to reduce the pressure and welcome their genuine desires. And that feeds a lot of emotional safety that heavily affects in the long term. So if you can ask yourself questions if you're on the receiving end like that, and know that if your partner is even going to say any of this stuff to you about what they're comfortable with, what they're not, it's because they do love you and care about you and they want this to last. And in the times I haven't really said what I'm comfortable with, it's because I know it's not going to last. Like, I know long term nothing's going to happen or it's not going to go anywhere. So for me, I'm like, it's probably pointless to bring this up anyways. Versus when I genuinely want to be with somebody and I want things to work and I want things to improve, I will communicate all of these things because I care about that person so much. So know that communication is such a form of love, and being honest is such a form of respect for you and them actually feeling very safe with you to be able to communicate these things. So feeling secure in yourself. You are not the same person at different stages of your life, so it's normal for your boundaries to change, and that should be expected. Like, it is totally fine if what you are comfortable with in high school is different than what you're comfortable with in college, or what you were comfortable with in your first relationship if you were 10 years old is different than what you're comfortable with now where you are in your life. That's normal, that's expected. Things are going to change, and whether that's you've set more boundaries or less boundaries, that's normal. I know a bunch of my friends that had, a lot going on in their lives, and so sex was kind of a coping mechanism, and so they slept around a lot, or they felt like they needed to have sex to feel loved at different times. And now they're at a place in their lives where they know their value, they understand themselves, they've healed through a lot of things that maybe beforehand they didn't really care about sex, and now that is something that is a boundary for them. So things can ebb and flow so much, and that's kind of what I said at the very start. Like, your capacity of what you're okay with does change. It's okay that it changes, and you are not the same person at different stages in your life. So don't be hard on yourself if your boundaries change as well, or feel awkward that, oh, I was okay with this for so long and now I'm trying to say no. That's okay. That's normal. A way to also feel secure in yourself is sex should not be a substitute for emotional intimacy. I heard someone once say that intimacy does not start in the bedroom, and I cannot tell you how true I've seen that to be in my life and the people around me. Sex should not be to fill a void, and you should never have to do sexual things to feel loved or connected, to even feel beautiful or cared for by somebody. That is going to lead to just a very temporary fix. And in the long run, you're not going to feel those emotions. by that person if sex is the reason that you're feeling that from them. And as I stated earlier in the podcast, I think sex is phenomenal. I think it's great. I think it's absolutely beautiful. And if it's taken out of context and if it's used for the wrong reasons in the wrong ways, that's where there can be just so much emotional damage and so much trauma that needs a lot of healing. So that's another big reason why I personally want to wait, because I know I never want to have to experience the trauma and the hurt and just that physical connection being broken, because when it is done for the wrong reasons, it just can leave so much pain. And you should feel very confident having your boundaries rooted in something strong that you know will keep you grounded, knowing why you have set them, how far you're willing to go, confident that you can say no or stop, and not feel shame or bad that you're going to be disappointing the person on the other end of it, if it really is such a safe place to be in. And I had a conversation recently with a friend, and we were discussing a scenario, and I'll just use myself as an example. She's at a point and I've been at a point where you try to set a physical boundary that has already been crossed, and maybe it's been crossed a million times. And now you've kind of figured out, okay, this isn't exactly what I want to do. When you try to set that boundary with somebody, it's so incredibly difficult and scary to have this conversation, obviously. And the response is so important, and how you will navigate from that point. And if somebody responds in a way that isn't exactly respecting that boundary you've set, whether that's, I mean, I've had times where I've set a boundary or I've done things and I'm like, okay, actually, I don't feel good about this. Like, I'm just not comfortable with this right now. And they never push me to do more, but in almost every relationship, I feel so bad. And the way they act after, you can tell they're so sad, they're so disappointed. I feel really guilty. And it's not like they're trying to make me feel guilty, but I definitely don't feel okay saying no. And then sometimes I'm even just like, okay, screw it. Or other times I'm like, well, now I feel bad. And I just apologize forever about it. And if that continues to happen, if that happens once or twice after you have these conversations, that's okay. That's not a pattern. That's fine. That's normal. But if it becomes a pattern where when you're trying to set your limit or your limits are changing and they're constantly responding in a way where you feel really bad or guilty, that is not a good sign. And that shows a lot of how little they respect you. Because if guilt is a pattern, or guilt and shame is an emotion you're going to feel after having any conversation, you're not going to probably get to a very sustainable place in your relationship with most things, not just physically, where you feel like your voice is heard and you can share your opinion and you can speak. And I did notice that in my relationship, not only sexually, but in so many things, I was absolutely terrified to talk. I was so scared to say my opinion in things, what I thought about something. Just there was so much, because I knew there would be this guilt that I would feel if it wasn't what that other person wanted to hear or wanted to do. And had I probably paid attention to those patterns a lot sooner, it would have been so much helpful for me in either knowing, okay, this relationship might not be it for me, or in knowing I need to actually be able to have power in the things that I'm saying, and I need to really work on the way I'm communicating for them to respect it. And if they're not going to respect it, then I am going to have to reconsider and reevaluate what's going on here. And the reason this is such a massive red flag to me, if they are not continuously making you feel safe to express your emotions, and they can't understand your physical comfort level or the conviction that you have, and I've always said, because I feel convicted, I shouldn't have to convince myself that it's okay. There's always such a deeper reasoning behind a no, that when that can be understood and your hearts are in the same place, there's way more success than pain and discomfort, guilt, shame, all of that. In conclusion, a boundary is just so much more than a rule. It's so much more than a rule. I would never say my rule is not having sex till I'm married, because there's so much, it's so much deeper than that. And the way that somebody is going to respect your boundary is just a huge reflection of how they respect you and honor you. Definitely talk and be open about the things with the safe person, and journal, even if it's for you to just remember so you don't block it out. Because there's been things that I've just blocked out and I genuinely don't remember because I was either embarrassed or I didn't want to remember it. And I wish that I had written those things down so that I could be able to process through it, because blocking things out, it stores in your body in some way, and it usually comes out at some point in your life in another area. And if I had known the root to certain things, I know that would have just helped me heal and process in a way healthier way. It's so much easier to maintain a line when it has not been crossed. So you cannot go back, but you can always stop. If you are able to not cross this line, it's going to be so much easier to maintain that line. Versus when it's crossed, it's so much harder to try to pull it back and take a few steps backwards. So just know, if you're in those moments, you do not owe them anything, and that will start building the confidence to stop things and set those boundaries by having your voice be heard and making that decision to follow through with what you're comfortable with. And lastly, I want to end this by just saying it is okay, and don't ever beat yourself up if things do happen, or if you enjoy things that happen that you didn't want to happen, and if you go farther than what you were planning on going. And I just don't ever want you to beat yourself up or to live in such guilt and shame when something's happened, because obviously we all make mistakes in life, and obviously sometimes things can happen that we weren't expecting, and just try not to let those moments come crashing down on everything else you've done. And that's been a big one for me, is I'm really in a mindset now where I'm trying to praise myself for the choices I make that reinforce my boundaries, versus rip on myself so much when I've slipped up or I haven't made a choice I'm proud of. And I've noticed just a huge difference of when I've done something and I just beat myself up like crazy about it, it's not very productive. And it's not fair to the other person either, because then I'm acting in a way that I wouldn't be acting if I wasn't beating myself up. And when I've been able, though, to change my mindset and be like, hey, well, okay, maybe that happened, but think about the 47 other times that you said no, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you knew this would have tempted you and you left. Praise yourself for the things that you do that reinforce that boundary, because those things are huge and they're not easy and they can be hard. And some days it's easier than others, but giving yourself acknowledgement and praise for those mini victories helps the little slip-ups feel less overpowering. Remember, there is so much power in saying no, and there's always hope to live each and every day in a way you're proud of and feel at your absolute best, most respected self and in complete control of your body. I hope this podcast helped you guys a lot, and wherever you are in your walk, please feel free to message me or write in the Facebook group. It's the Finding Hope Podcast. It's a private group, so don't worry. It's a very safe space there. But if there's anything that you're like personally going through, or if there's something that you have questions on that you want some insight into, I would be more than happy to answer those and to talk deeper about this with you guys. This was just a general topic of how to set boundaries, how to have boundaries, knowing it's okay to say no. And I just really hope that this gave you a lot of encouragement and confidence and helped you feel understood in whatever aspect and whatever path you're on with this walk. And I'm still figuring it out. I'm more than happy to be on this journey with you. Thank you so much for coming. Don't forget to, if you are visual, that this podcast is on YouTube. I highly encourage you watch this video, especially because my little pixie Rose is in it and she's literally the cutest thing ever. But I love you guys. I wish you the best week. And Pixie, wake up, sweetie. Say bye, honey. Say bye. Bye, friends.